Everyone, and welcome to the online discussion on open access publishing in the humanities. Can everyone hear me? I hope so. My name is Dominique Daniel, and I'm a librarian at Oakland University in Michigan. We have two discussion leaders who are knowledgeable about the issue of open access in the humanities and who will share their experience with us today. And we will start by giving the discussion leaders 10 minutes each to give us an overview of the issue of open access publishing in the humanities. Then the attendees will be able to ask questions, offer comments, or share their experiences. This is not a traditional webinar, but really a conversation. And as Yelena mentioned, I would like to remind all of you that the conversation is being recorded and will be posted online later on. And I'm glad to see that we have so many participants. This is why the microphones were muted, so that Yelena, our moderator, can help monitor everybody's participation. So you can contact her directly by chat. You can ask questions or make a comment at any time during the event. I should point out that Yelena is the Associate Director and Managing Editor of Reviews at H-Net, an international interdisciplinary organization of scholars and teachers whose communities publish reviews, essays, discussions, and other forms of scholarly collaboration. And she has kindly agreed to help us organize and manage this online discussion. And I'm very grateful to her for that. So first, I would like to say a few words about the organizers, me. I'm the editor of H-HistBibl, H-Net network composed of librarians, archivists, curators, scholars interested in the practice and study of teaching and of library services to support teaching and research in history. On my network, I regularly post news items of interest on scholarly communication, digital humanities, and pretty much any other topic of interest to members. Cella, on the other hand, is the European World History and Philosophy librarian at Emory University. She's also the chair of the history section, one of the sections of the Reference and User Services Association of the American Library Association. The membership of this section includes history librarians, genealogists, historians, archivists, bibliographers, and other professionals who work in academic libraries and other institutions. And this is the first free online discussion jointly sponsored by our two organizations, H-HistBibl and the Russo History section. And our goals are to bring faculty and history or humanities librarians together to discuss relevant issues pertaining to scholarship and instruction, and also to encourage faculty and librarians to explore opportunities for collaboration. So I would now like to introduce the two speakers. First, Seth Denbo. He's the Director of Scholarly Communication and Digital Initiatives at the American Historical Association. He's also a historian, a cultural historian of 18th century Britain. He has worked on digital projects and participated actively in the development of innovative digital tools and methods for historical scholarship. At the AHA, he oversees the publication department, and he can tell us more about his work there. Our second speaker is Sarah McKee. She's the Senior Associate Director for Publishing at the Bill and Carol Fox Center for Humanistic Inquiry at Emory University. Prior to her arrival at Emory in 2017, she worked for 15 years at the University of Georgia Press, serving most recently as managing editor of the New Georgia Encyclopedia, which is an open access digital humanities reference work. And at Emory, she's implementing the Digital Publishing in the Humanities initiative funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation, which offers support to faculty in developing and publishing digital monographs. So we'll now turn to Cella to get us started.
Thank you, Dominique. Is everyone able to hear me?
Yes.
So I would like to say that our two speakers will now have about 10 minutes each to share more information with us. And I would like them to tell us more about their work, especially relating to open access publishing, outline what they think are the main achievements in that area, and suggest challenges and future developments. So I would also like to mention that 1 minute before the time is up, I will briefly interrupt the speaker. I hope that's okay, to ensure that we do not go over time and leave enough time for the Q&A. So I would like to invite Seth Denbo to start the discussion, please.
Sorry, just unmuting myself here. Thank you all, Dominique and Yelena and Cheta. I'm really pleased to be asked to do this. I guess I can begin by saying a little bit about what our various publishing activities are at the AHA and what we're doing around issues relating to open access. And then I will, I guess, once I've done that, I'll talk a little bit about some of the other things I think are some of the most consequential changes that are happening in scholarly publishing, especially, you know, in the area that I know most about, which is historical publishing and the humanities a little bit more broadly. We, as an organization, publish a scholarly journal, the American Historical Review. It's the flagship journal in the field. It publishes 5 times a year. We publish about 25 scholarly articles and close to 1,000 book reviews. It's a big operation compared to many scholarly journals in the humanities. It has a fairly large staff. It involves a whole team of graduate students at the University of Indiana, where our editorial office is. It also has a large group of an editorial board, which helps us to sort of run the journal and assess all of the articles, assess all of the submissions and things. So it's not a cheap operation, and I think that's I'm going to come back to that sort of question about cost in a bit later on, talking more broadly about how we think about open access. The journal is, according to many open access people who are advocates or one might even say zealots of when it comes to open access, probably doesn't count as open access. It is published for us by Oxford University Press. You have one to receive it. One has to subscribe to it, but we have a very open model. We publish everything in the journal older than 3 years old. All of the articles in the journal, at least, are available for free for anybody to access via the web. We often open up more recent content as well for periods of time, for various reasons, depending on what whether something is particularly relevant for a particular contemporary debate or something that's going on in popular culture that we might want to highlight. So we're very keen for, you know, we believe in openness of scholarship very strongly. I think historians, generally speaking, have been in favor of open knowledge. But that said, the journal, you know, it is still a subscription model, and I think for the foreseeable future, it will be published according to a subscription model. And there are reasons for that we can talk about and debate if people are interested in doing so. We publish a monthly members magazine. Again, this goes out to members, but all of the content on it is available openly on the web, and that we publish under a CC license. So, and that has actually, you know, it's not just kind of a newsletter. It's not just members, you know, stuff for members. It's stuff of relevance to everybody in the discipline of history. So, you know, we know it's assigned in classes, that teachers use it, that people use it in helping them figure out how to be better historians, be better academics, be better educators. Those are our 2 primary publications as an organization. We do a range of other publishing on the web and in print. I won't get into those in depth because I'll run low on time. But in terms of open access, I think my role is, and one of the primary roles of the association, and I think any association should be, is education. I would still venture to say, and I do think a lot's changed in the 5 years I've been in this role, but I would still venture to say that a lot of my members and a lot of members of the discipline, a lot of humanists don't really understand what open access is. They're busy teaching classes, busy writing books, doing research, all of the things that they do, and that's fair enough. I mean, I think in a lot of ways they need to have a better handle on scholarly communication, and that includes open access, and I think that's one of the association's roles. We try to provide honest assessments of how open access works, what it means, what the various models for open access are, why a scholar might want to publish something as open access or might not want to publish it in an open access publication. So really assessing some of the benefits and drawbacks. I mean, like any change, like any new model for publishing or any new model for how one does business, it has benefits and it has drawbacks. And I think one of the problems in the open access world is that those things can be difficult to talk about because there's a certain amount of sort of knowledge wants to be free rhetoric in this whole ecosystem, in this whole world. And yes, knowledge wants to be free, but creating knowledge and publishing knowledge is not a cheap enterprise, and I think that's important. And I'm not saying this because by any means I'm against open access. I think it has its place. I think it's an important development in how scholarly communication works. I also, we educate our members in the hopes that they will get involved in discussions about open access on their campus. And, over the past few years with faculty senates, creating open access mandates on many campuses, it's important for faculty to know what that means and how they should react to it and whether or not, and to be in on those conversations. And I think it's important for humanists to be in on those conversations as much as anything else, because we're coming later to this story than to this issue than a lot of people in the sciences and to some extent in the social sciences. So educating them about what mandates mean, how to approach them, what to do, how to get involved, and when they might want to publish something, as I said, open access or not. And we do this via articles in our monthly members magazine, materials on our website. I'm in the process of updating a statement that we wrote about 4 or 5 years ago on scholarly publishing that tries to sort of address some of these various questions, including open access. The original statement was put out in response to when everybody who in the open access world was talking about the Finch report, and the statement goes into quite a lot of detail about the Finch report, which was this pretty monumental report in the UK that made waves all over the scholarly communication world. It's now sort of, we're 5 years down the line, it's time to update this. So I'm working on updates to that. We also regularly hold sessions at our annual meeting on open access. Last year I participated in one on it included me, a press director, a library, a dean of a library, and somebody else from a university press, talking about open access monographs. So there's a variety of ways in which I work to educate my members and to educate people in the discipline more broadly, and this is one of them. I mean, one of the things I will say, and I find this a little frustrating, because one of my major roles is helping members of the discipline and historians more broadly to figure out to understand how the world is changing when it comes to their publishing and scholarly communication. And when we held this session on open access monographs, it was very well attended. There were probably 60 or 70 people in the room, which is a good attendance for a session at our annual meeting. But I would say 3/4 of the people half the people from libraries, a quarter of the people or more were from presses, and there were really only a handful of historians in the room. And a couple of them, the historians in the room, came up to me later and said, "Oh, that was great. I learned more about that than, somebody I know came up to me. I learned more at this session about open access than I have in my whole 7 years as a graduate student," which is great. But it's sometimes hard to pull people into these conversations. I'd be interested in hearing back from the hosts of this who who the attendees are and what roles they're in their particular institutions and organizations, because I'd be interested to see who the audience here is.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You have 1 more minute. I'm just
Oh,
keeping
I'm
track
running
of
out of
time.
time really quickly. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about open access monograph publishing. One of the things we published was from a fairly prominent member of ours who published with last year, who published with Luminos Press, which is the University of California's open access monograph imprint, and had very good reasons for doing so. And I wanted to show that there were some real benefits. And I think in terms of the humanities, most humanities fields anyway, open access, the monograph side of things is where we should be sort of putting most of our effort in and thinking most about. Because that's where the kind of core of our publishing happens. Even though open access, when people talk about open access in the broader world of scholarly communication, it's mostly about the sciences. But here because it's mostly about journals, because that's where most of the sort of publishing is done, where the largest numbers are publishing. So let me, I'll just finish up really quickly and say that, as my, I don't know if you saw my American Historical Association mug. No, you can't say it. I was drinking coffee out of this mug, which one of our slogans is "Everything has a history," and I want to say that includes scholarly communication, and we're sort of in a period of rapid change when it comes to scholarly communication, and part of that is about how we communicate, how we use the web to communicate, and what the impact of that is on how open we can be, and I think we ought to be thinking, not just saying, oh, this is an inevitable change, but really thinking about how the change is happening, why it's happening, and how we can make it happen in ways that benefit us as scholars. And that's I think the core of this.
Thank you very much, Seth. And now I would like to invite Sarah McKee.
Hello. I'm okay. I can see Chella, so I'm not sure what everybody else can see, but hello. Thank you again for inviting me to participate, Chella and Dominique. And thank you, Seth. I think I can echo a number of the points that Seth was making in terms of what we're trying to do here at Emory University, very specifically with open access monographs. So I've been here at Emory for just over a year, and I was hired to implement a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, which was developed to support Emory faculty in the development and formal publication of digital monographs. And I can kind of break down a little bit what that means. But the history of the grant actually began in the academic year 2014-2015, when a group of faculty members, I think about 12 or 13, came together to really talk about digital publication and digital scholarship and what that meant, and what the values would be at Emory, and how faculty at Emory could go about exploring that. And they brought in speakers from various presses, and just really spent some time digging into the issues and thinking about what would be helpful to faculty on campus. And so they ended up applying for another grant, which is what we're calling on campus the Digital Publishing and Humanities Initiative. And it works on kind of 2 levels. So on the first level, we are providing a subsidy that would go directly to publishers who agree to publish a monograph as open access. And the focus, I think, as Seth mentioned, on the monograph was actually a very deliberate and careful decision made by those faculty members, as opposed to journal articles or some other genres that humanities faculty might be working in. And in fact, a white paper came out of that, which I would be happy to share the link to that, which was written by the now Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here, Michael Elliott, who's also the project director on this particular Mellon grant, that really argues for the importance of the monograph and for sustaining it, but sort of talks through not just the benefits of making something digital or making it open access, but sort of lost my train of thought there, I'm sorry, but also the problem that the presses are having in continuing to support monograph publication. That, of course, the monographs do not pay for themselves, and so we're really trying to not only encourage the publication from the faculty side, but also to make it a little easier and to help lessen the risk for publishers who are willing to take this next step into digital publishing. So that was sort of the grounding for this grant and the way that we're approaching it here. And so we have the digital publishing subsidy, which would go to presses who are willing to make basically an ebook open access. So that's, we're following in many ways what the Luminous model is, which Seth also mentioned. But other presses are kind of looking into, they may not have a separate imprint that's just set aside for open access, but they're willing to consider that if we can bring a subsidy to the table for a book that has already been accepted for publication. So when we talk about digital monographs here at Emory, we're definitely including the open access monograph in an ebook version, but we're also expanding that definition a little bit and trying to encourage, the exploration of the digital environment, so that maybe you have a print version of the book, but then you also have a website that's a complement to it, or then even one step beyond that, that maybe you have a fully integrated digital monograph in which you have the text, but then you also have, multimedia elements, it's interactive, and the reader is not really jumping from a book object to a website and back and forth, that everything is sort of contained. And that is really the next frontier. We don't really have any examples of that to look at other than perhaps the Enchanting the Desert, which is widely considered to be the first digital monograph published by Stanford University Press in 2016. And Stanford is sort of on the cutting edge of publishing these types of monographs, and there are a few more coming out sometime this spring that we'll all be able to look at. So the publishing subsidy is a big part of that. We also, as part of this program, are offering funding for workshops, which can help faculty members develop their ideas and think about the differences between composing their argument in a book form, but then, translating that into the digital environment and taking advantage of the multimedia affordances within the various platforms, there are many currently under development and coming out from different presses, and many of those are also supported by the Mellon Foundation. And then we also work very closely with our Center for Digital Scholarship here. They provide in-kind development support and consultations for faculty who are interested in exploring the different modes of digital publishing. The second part of the grant is definitely, I think in response to one of the issues that Seth also noted, which is that a lot of faculty just don't really know that much about open access, and digital publication is kind of a wild new world for many people. And so the second part of the grant is really focused on what we think of as socialization. It's kind of the term for it in the grant, where we are bringing in speakers. We're running kind of broader workshops. We did a reading group on open access in the fall. We are reaching out to the graduate students through some fellowship program that we have here at the Fox Center, and just trying to find other ways of programming, often with other campus partners, to just help explain open access as a funding model, and then also to explain what some of the options are in the digital environment, once you've decided to put your scholarship there. There's one other program that I would like to mention at this point that Emory is involved in, and it falls alongside the grant, and that is the TOME initiative, which TOME, which stands for Toward Open Monograph Ecosystem. And this is a collaboration among the Association of University Presses, the Association of Research Libraries, and the Association of American University Presses. And this has been in the works now for several years, and it's meant to encourage all of the institutions like Emory, and I think at this point there are probably 15 or 16 of them, have all committed to publishing, to finding the funds on their campuses to publish at least 15 open access monographs over the next 5 years. And the baseline subsidy that will be provided to the press is $15,000. And so for us here at Emory, that subsidy money is coming out of our grant. At other institutions, it's coming mainly from money that is being channeled in through the provost's office or through the libraries. There's several different kinds of funding models out there. But all of that sort of also comes back to the point that I would say in terms of challenges for open access, I mean, we know that there is some real good in putting and making scholarship more widely available. It creates larger impact for the author. We see the downloads, we see the views, and we know that it's getting to a wider audience. But funding is definitely an issue because it's free for readers, but not for the creators, of course. And so figuring out how to create a sustainable model, where do we go when the Mellon money runs out, for example, here at Emory? What will that funding model look like is a very big question for us. And I think another challenge, especially when you start to move into the more multimedia digital aspect for many faculty, are, we insist that all of the books that we fund are peer reviewed, and most of them are being published by, or that we anticipate that most of them will be published by established university presses. And so, how do we peer review things that maybe don't always take a purely text form? And how do we train people to do that and to feel comfortable with that? And then as far as future developments go, I think it'll be interesting to see if scholars are willing to embrace a form beyond the book. I know here at Emory we do have faculty who are very interested in doing that and yet feel very cautious about how that will be perceived, how that will be accepted, and even how to put that together, right? Because it's a different way of writing and thinking and presenting an argument than what we've all been trained to do. So I guess I'll stop there and just and see if there are other questions. But
Ooh, thank you. Thank you very much, Seth and Sarah, for providing us an overview of open access publishing in the humanities, and also for sharing with us the efforts that are currently underway at your institutions and organizations. So now we would like to welcome questions and comments from our audience. So I'd like to say we'll devote about 20 minutes to Q&A and discussion. So again, all microphones of the audience will be muted, so please feel free to type your questions in the chat box. And we just thought it might be easier to do this given the large number of attendees. And then again, our discussion guides will address them accordingly. Yelena will compile the questions and share them with our discussion guides. So again, our goal is to have a productive conversation. So let's get started.
Okay, so I see that Dominique has already primed us with a couple of questions. It looks like her first questions had to do with educating the HA's members. Sarah talked a bit about how she's been educating folks on her campus, and whether the HA works with librarians. So I don't know if, Seth, you want to address that one to begin. How are you educating members?
I mean, I think I talked a little bit about that, but, through articles in our monthly members magazine, through materials we're putting on our website about open access models, about by putting out into the world, by helping them to find other materials that are out there, through sessions at our annual meeting. I mean, it's one of the things we convening discussions and getting people together to talk about things and discuss things is one of the things that scholarly associations are best at. So our main initiatives are really around holding events and publishing materials where that happens. I mean, we have done some work with librarians. I would love to do more. Some of it is there's will to do these things. It's about finding the time and the resources. I mean, we have a fair number of librarians who are members. We have a librarian who is on our digital history working group who I've worked with on things like this. I've been on panels with librarians and attend a lot of sessions that involve librarians talking about open access. When we've had sessions about open access, we've had people from the ALA or from the ARL. So we try to keep try to involve librarians, and I think it's really important. And the other thing I do a lot of when I go to campuses and do visits and talk to historians is I tell them to talk to their own librarians. I mean, I think on big research institutions especially, it's often not, people don't know that they have, say, open access experts on their campus that they can talk to, or digital publishing experts on their campus that they can talk to. Does that answer your question, Dominique?
And a follow-up, how do faculty respond to educational efforts on OA? I guess to either of you then.
How do faculty respond to, looking for the question.
To educational efforts on open access.
Okay. Well, if they've already heard something about it and they're interested, then the conversations can be really fruitful. But I've had another similar experience, I think, to Seth, in that, for example, we tried to do a big brown bag presentation for faculty in the fall about open access and about the grant and the subsidy possibilities, and we had a pretty good turnout of librarians, and it was not mainly the faculty that we were really trying to reach. And it was great to have the librarians in the room, because I see them as absolutely essential partners in this, because they are very often the ones that faculty are working with at the very inception of a project, and they can kind of help them think through some of those possibilities as they begin a new project. But I think it's a challenge. It's a challenge. And what I'm realizing is that, we can try to do these sort of larger programs, but as one faculty member pointed out to me, is like, as soon as you put something digital, if you say digital, it immediately seems to decrease the audience for who's going to come out and participate in that event. And so a lot of what I've been doing over the last year, I would say, is actually one-on-one conversations with people and sort of talking through the options. But then when they understand that an open access book is going to reduce barriers significantly for audiences that they really care about, like their students, or for especially audiences overseas, especially if the research is based in something overseas, then they start to get, really excited and interested and wanting to know more. So we're still really trying to figure that out, I would say, but as the idea starts to really gain traction, we have a couple of books that will soon be coming out that were funded by the subsidy, and we can kind of share those more widely on campus, and people can have something sort of tangible to click on. Not exactly tangible, but they can look at the result of something that the subsidy funded. I'm hopeful that at that point, those conversations will come a little more easily and a little more naturally.
It looks like there are a couple of questions, a couple of specific questions about relationship between faculty and graduate students in OA. So Chris LeBeau asks, at Emory, what changes in the tenure process have been made to advance OA, and do you feel like more is needed? And then it looks like maybe a related question from Rebecca. Does the AHA have any plans to change their recommendations about embargoing dissertations? So a little bit about, the fallout of using OA.
Well, I can address the Emory question. So I don't think any particular changes have been made in the tenure process recently, but several years ago, there was an appendix added to the promotion and tenure guidelines that was kind of just a broad scope endorsement of digital scholarship, so that if a faculty member does decide to go this route, they at least have that to point to. Although I would say in practice that those decisions and are still very much at the departmental level. So there hasn't been, since that time, a more specific addressing of open access as opposed to digital scholarship kind of generally. But what we're doing, I think, with this grant is really trying to maybe skirt that issue a little bit by ensuring that everything that we fund is peer reviewed and that it's formally published. Because I think a lot of the kind of residual resistance to open access is coming from, if it's published with a small open access press that the tenure or promotion committee is not familiar with, or an open access journal that has those same issues, or just kind of these lingering, concerns that people hear about predatory journals. I mean, there's just a lot of, confusion and concern floating around out there that, because many faculty members don't know that much about open access, kind of all gets congealed together. So by really focusing on publishing with established presses who the authors would be publishing with anyway, and of course, as a result, all of those manuscripts are peer reviewed, that and in many cases there will be a print version of the book. So the fact that the open access, the ebook version is open access, just is really kind of a funding or model as opposed to anything to do with the content. So that's sort of how we're approaching it here. It will get much more complicated for, I think, the more interactive digital projects that look more like a website than a traditional book. So.
Can I comment on that before I come back to the dissertations thing? So we published a few years ago some new guidelines for digital scholarship, and one of the goals of those guidelines was one of the primary goals of those guidelines was to promote digital scholarship and to encourage departments to change their tenure guidelines in order to open them up to different kinds of outputs. And I think, but that's not really to do with open access. And I think it seems to me, and maybe I'm reading too much into Chris's question, but that assumption sort of assumes that open access is fundamentally a good thing, and that somehow making something open in any fashion should be rewarded. And I push back against that a bit, and I think it comes back to what Sarah just said a minute ago about open access being about a business model rather than about the content. And really what we need to do is open up the tenure process to being agnostic to some extent about the media and those kinds of issues, and more focused on the content, and more focused on how that content contributes to knowledge, and how that content gets out there into the world in ways that are beneficial to the discipline and to the scholar and to the scholarly enterprise to some extent. And I think that's what's really important. And worrying too much about what the business model is. I mean, I could see a situation in which you say, publishing an open access gives you, as they do in the UK, where your open access publications count more towards their assessment frameworks than non-open access publications, or where, okay, just because your project your funding provides you with the money to say to Elsevier that you're going to pay their extremely high gold open access charges, doesn't mean that your scholarship is any better or more valuable to the world than anybody else's. So I want to push back against that idea a little bit. I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into Chris's question, but I'm just a little wary about that. That said, opening up the tenure process to being much more agnostic and much broader about the kinds of things we care about as within our discipline is really vital. And I think that's a really important change that I think is happening, and happening slowly, but it is happening. The AHA's recommendations on dissertations, I figured this would come up. I kind of hoped it wouldn't. No, we have no intention of changing that, and which is the short answer. The long answer is that we didn't recommend that people embargo their dissertations. All we recommended was, and the misunderstanding here is probably mostly our fault, because I think the guidelines, the recommendation was badly worded. All we were recommending is that the scholar should be the one to make the decision about when to make their scholarship public, when and how to make their scholarship broadly accessible to the public. So really the statement was arguing for choice, and scholar choice is important. I think, publishing, how you publish, when you make your scholarship accessible and publish it broadly is vital. And I don't think we should be forcing, especially the early career people who are in the most vulnerable positions, and are trying to establish themselves and make their careers into one way of doing things. There are different ways of, open access has different valences, different benefits to different disciplines. And really all we were saying there is that graduate students or early career scholars should have a choice about how this happens, how and when this happens.
Okay. We've had a couple of folks express an interest in open peer review. Would either of you like to tackle that subject?
I'm happy to talk about it. One of the questions I noticed was the question about, have we experimented with open peer review? We have not as an organization. I would like to see us maybe try it. I know there are, I think openness of peer review, again, has some real benefits. I mean, that it becomes, I think when peer review is open and that leads to a kind of conversation, a real exchange of ideas between scholars who understand the issues that are being raised and who understand the arguments, then that's exactly what we want scholarship to be, right? An open conversation, a disciplined conversation, a conversation which is based upon the scholarly work of others. All of those things are vital and absolutely important. I will say that I also think that, and I've been in on lots of conversations about peer review over the last few years in my role here, and I will say that I think there are sometimes good reasons for having closed peer review. I also know that it leads to bad behavior at times, but I don't think, and to some extent that openness would be really valuable. I would like to see scholars and institutions and organizations and publishers not put so much value on the form of peer review, the form that peer review takes, but think about the best way to do peer review for whatever. We fetishize double-blind peer review, for example. That has some real values. There's things you can do and things you can say that are valuable sometimes if there's anonymity. There was a piece in Critical Inquiry earlier this year or last year, which some scholars did some research they looked at 4 journals and they looked at peer review. 2 of those journals operate a completely blind on both sides, a double-blind peer review. 2 of them don't. It's sort of not quite double-blind. And the 2 that operate a fully double-blind peer review, it was pretty clear from the research that their authors come from more diverse institutions, were educated at more diverse institutions. So there's value in that, in not knowing who wrote the work that you're evaluating is, because it can encourage diversity. It can deal with some of the kind of inbuilt prejudices that most of us have. So there are benefits to blindness in peer review, but I also would love to see scholars and publishers experiment with other models for doing so.
Yeah, and here at Emory, I mean, we really throw the peer review responsibility is on the publisher, and so we're not actively engaging in peer review here, and so I think that for us would come down to the individual presses, although I would be really interested to hear what especially in individual departments, how a book that had been openly peer reviewed as opposed to the more traditional methods, how that would be perceived, and I would sort of want to know in advance if that would cause problems, but that's not something that we're actively engaging in here, so I'm not sure I have too much more to add to that.
Okay, we have 2 questions specifically about librarians. So maybe for Sarah, if you could give some suggestions for how history or humanities subject librarians would like, what they can do to explore partnerships with faculty in this area. And then another question maybe for Seth is about how research librarians can get involved in the AHA. And I'll bring it back after Sarah and give more detail about that question.
Okay, so, as I said earlier, I think that subject area librarians are tremendously helpful as partners in this enterprise, just because, they typically do understand what open access is and how it works, and just mentioning that to faculty members as they're working together on a project, I think would be tremendously helpful. I mean, and maybe another thing is within the individual libraries, I know that there's been a lot of conversation about reallocating acquisitions budgets toward supporting open access, and that some libraries, including ours here at Emory, in addition to the grant fund that we have, there's also an open access publishing fund that, at a more modest level, but that has also just this, in the last couple of months supported an open access book from a graduate student, actually. So, I think just sort of opening that door and starting that conversation is probably the most helpful thing. And then, specifically what you could do would be dependent on what's happening on your campus and where the funding is coming from to actually, help support an author who wants to publish this way, because inevitably there will be some kind of subvention required, typically from the publisher that you might be working with. So.
Okay. And Seth, we have a question about how research librarians can get involved with the AHA on a committee level to discuss issues like open access, whether DH groups are the best avenue for this, or if the AHA has ever considered establishing a history librarians section. So involvement between librarians and the AHA.
I mean, we have a fair number of librarians who are members. We don't have sections. We're unlike the MLA, for example, or the American Anthropological Association, in that we don't have our governing structure doesn't have that kind of setup. So we don't. I would love to get more, work with librarians more and figure out ways of getting them more involved in what we're doing. I've been thinking for a while about setting up some sort of a kind of history librarians committee, whether that's a sort of informal sort of kitchen cabinet type thing or something a bit more formal. I haven't really thought about it. Haven't figured it out yet. But I've always thought that we should, as an organization, be involving our historians who are members more in these conversations and bringing them more into the organizational fold. I think it's as Sarah said, conversations between historians and librarians, whether they're history subject librarians or scholarly communications experts within the library more broadly, or any of these things are really vital. And I say this all the time when I talk to historians. I think librarians are the kind of intellectuals of the information age, and we're all living through this, and we all have to deal with it in our professional and in our professional lives all the time now. The days when it was, when scholars could sort of say, oh, the publishing side of it, the library side of all that stuff is somebody else's problem. If that was ever true, it's certainly no longer true. I think one of the things that the changes we're living through in scholarly communication, that are happening in scholarly communication, has done is while all of the things that we all do at the core of our jobs are all still necessary, I think the kind of boundaries between our jobs are much more up for grabs, and the boundaries between how we think about what it is that a scholar does, what it is the librarian does, what it is that an archivist does, what it is that a publisher does, have dissolved in some ways, and that the web and the digital scholarship and digital publishing has kind of brought that about. And so I think it's vital that more conversations are happening, and that the organization is doing more and that we as an organization do more to bring librarians into conversations with with people within the historical discipline.
Okay, so another related question we have to librarians, there's a question about costs. CPOTS asks about the cost having risen 4 times since 2012. And if I'm reading between the lines, whether that's even related to OA, or I don't know if you want to address that, Seth.
I saw Chris's comment. I think, Chris, is that getting your name right? I think so. I'd have to look into that. I'm really surprised by that. I know that it increases a small amount every year, but we're actually pretty careful about ensuring that costs, as I understand it, the costs don't rise that quickly. I'm gonna go back and check my numbers, that and make sure that that's and check on that figure, because I think it's important to us that the value of humanities journals and in particular our journal stays viable for libraries. We compared to what people pay for science journals, humanities journals are very affordable for the most part. The AHR, it depends on, obviously we have a scale depending on the size of the institution. The pricing is scaled to the size of the institution, but we work hard to make sure that the price is not outrageous. And we know from talking to librarians and talking to institutions that that publishing, that our journal and other journals in the humanities have very low cost per use. So, and I think that's really important. I don't think for the most part, humanities journals, society journals in the humanities, and journals published, humanities journals published by university presses are involved in some of the price gouging that goes on in the for-profit side of this industry. And I think that's really important to us as an organization. It's not a cheap thing to produce. Producing high quality scholarly publications is an expensive process, and it needs to get paid for somewhere. But it's important to us that we keep those prices affordable. So I will look into that. Thank you for raising that.
Chala, how are we doing on time?
I think we are at 3:53, so maybe we could do 2 more minutes and then wrap up around 3:55, because we do have 2 specific questions for our audience as well.
Okay. Well, it looks like one of the latest questions is about providing access to countries and scholars around the world, especially those that do not have financial resources to purchase access to scholarly monographs and journals. And maybe this would go to a more fundamental question about OH. How accessible is it? Is it universally accessible, et cetera? If somebody could tackle that.
I could talk quickly about the AHR. Oxford University Press, who's our partner in publishing the AHR, has a program where journals go at extremely rich. Journals are sold to countries on. There's a couple of World Bank, I think, maintains these lists of developing and underdeveloped nations in the global south, and the poorest nation, the list of the poorest nations get our journal for almost nothing, and then there's another level which they're greatly reduced costs. So we're pretty we're pretty generous in the way we try to get that out there. That said, I mean, there is no doubt that making things open, putting things on the open web, taking away the burden of subscriptions increases access in parts of the world and this is true of monograph publishing too. I mean, I've seen the figures for Luminous Press. I mean, Luminous Press books are getting downloaded at great numbers in places like Vietnam. These are not places that the University of California, this is not a place that the University of California Press is good at getting to with print books. So there's, we know there are benefits to this. I'm not by no means saying that they're not, but at the same time, their business models need to be viable and sustainable. And I think sustainable is a word Sarah used earlier. We can't throw away the baby with the bathwater. We've got to be able to publish scholarship, and publishing scholarship costs money.
Well, that's all absolutely true. And I'm sorry, I was still muted earlier. But I think the idea that audiences in other countries where, typically getting access to, very expensive monographs is a challenge, is very appealing to many of the faculty here at Emory. I mean, as soon as we start talking about that, interest peaks. And so I do think the international audience is a really big component for open access. But one of the things that we also have to realize, and that comes up in conversations here all the time, is that, you know, sometimes internet access is an issue. And so we can't always presume that that access is available, and that in some places, you know, internet access is primarily through a mobile phone. So thinking about, you know, what we can do to make material accessible in that environment, as opposed to assuming that everybody's going to be, you know, on a laptop or you know, have a big screen in which to look at the book. So, but overall, I think that that's a strong selling point for many of the authors here at Emory.
Okay, so as we are almost like 3 minutes to 4, so I would like to first of all thank our audience for your thought-provoking questions, and also our discussion guides for patiently answering all the questions and engaging us in a lively discussion. So we have 2 questions for the audience. That is, it would be helpful if you could just briefly type your response to these 2 questions in the chat box so that we can collect them and organize future discussions based on the feedback. And there is a slide up, so if you don't mind just quickly typing in a few responses, we would appreciate that.
I agree with Dominique's point about a session that's specifically about open access monographs. As Sarah and I both pointed out, this is a central problem for the humanities now, and I think looking at the different business models and what's going on, I think would be really useful. I know Dominique asked a question on that early on, but we didn't get to it. So I'm going to second that.
That's great.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of interesting questions in there. Should we just keep talking all afternoon and carry on answering these questions?
That would be great. I think we should collect the responses and see if we could organize another one. And thank you again, everyone. This is our very first one, and we were a little bit anxious about how it would be, but we are really happy that we had a very lively discussion. So we hope to host several more in future. So, and once again, I would like to thank our speakers, Seth, Denbo, and Sarah McKee, for taking the time to chat with us today. So we really appreciate that. And thanks to our audience for attending and participating in this.